Live from SABC headquarters in Auckland Park, Johannesburg. Welcome to this Tuesday edition of the Watchdog. My name is Mpho, and on the show this evening, the battle for Gauteng intensifies. Following her ousting last Friday, DA Councillor Mpho Palazzo is heading back to court to challenge the move that resulted in the ANC's Dada Morero becoming the new City of Joburg mayor. She's on standby to talk us through her court challenge. And after that interview, we speak to the ANC officials who masterminded the DA-led administration's exit in the city of Joburg about their plan to do the same in Ekurhuleni and Tshwane metros.
There's no drama. It has all been well executed, and we wish the new premier well. No drama perhaps, but is replacing Gauteng's premier a wise and necessary thing to do ahead of the 2024 national and provincial elections? Our panel for this evening weighs in on the news that broke this afternoon that Education MEC and newly elected ANC provincial chairperson Panyaza Lesufi will on Thursday replace David Makhura at the helm of South Africa's richest and most populous province. All that and more in tonight's episode of The Watchdog, which starts right now. Former executive mayor of the city of Joburg, Mpho Phalatse, has filed papers in the High Court in Johannesburg to have last Friday's extraordinary council meeting, where she was removed during a motion of no confidence, a vote declared unlawful. She joins me on the line to explain her latest move. Dr. Phalatse, good evening. Thanks very much for your time.
Good evening. Thanks for having me.
Well, second time around, what makes you think you may just achieve what you wanted to achieve last week but failed?
We did not fail last week. Last week we applied for an urgent interdict to try and stop the council meeting from taking place in the first place on grounds that it was an illegal meeting. It did not follow due process as required by the rules of council. The only reason it didn't go through is because it went before the judge just after the votes had happened. The motion was carried, and therefore it did not qualify anymore for an urgent interdict. It had to move to a different role. We knew that we were going to go to court at a later stage, and at this point we've got the date of the 12th of October.
But on what basis are you approaching the court? What was wrong with last week's meeting?
Well, council is governed by rules. We've got a rule book. We've got committees of council. There are certain things that must precede a council meeting. The first one is that on the day of the election of the speaker, she said that we would have a special council meeting at the end of recess. Recess ends on the 10th of October. She made that pronouncement in council into the record, and therefore councillors would have potentially packed up, traveled, because she had said we're not going to have a meeting. The following day she had a change of heart, and she decided she wanted a meeting. She called a programming meeting last minute. I think there was about a 3-hour notice for that programming meeting. Programming is a committee of council that decides on the agenda of council, and it has to be constituted by members from different political parties. It has to have a quorum in order for it to qualify against the representation criteria. Unfortunately, that programming meeting did not correct. It was called at the last minute. People were not there. They were not able to attend. There was no quorum, and therefore it should not have proceeded. However, she continued with an incorrect programming meeting to table a motion of no confidence that had actually been rejected by a previous programming meeting on grounds that it did not meet the requirements for a motion. First of all, it's got an item there that's still before the courts, and our rules are very clear on that. You cannot bring a motion to council on a matter that's still before the courts, and that's just one of the disqualification criteria, and I could go on and on. She continued to table it before the programming committee that was incorrect, and they continued to agree that this motion is going to be tabled before council the following day. This council meeting was called with less than a 24-hour notice. Normally we observe a 72-hour notice, There is, of course, exceptions where on an urgent basis, the speaker may call a council meeting. However, the motions do not qualify on urgency basis. Therefore, there were no grounds really for her to rush this meeting. People were not informed in time. People did not even receive a notice of the election of a new mayor. So the notice that went out only spoke to the motion. It did not speak to the election of a mayor, which was another glaring omission on her part. And so there were so many issues that were wrong with how this meeting was called and how this meeting was actually conducted. We should have interdicted it. Unfortunately, we didn't get before a judge in time.
Okay, let me pick up on a couple of issues you've just, from what you've just said. One is the meeting of the programming committee. Is that a prerequisite to having an extraordinary council meeting?
Yes. No meeting of council sits without programming going through the agenda. Programming also needs to be afforded sufficient time to study the reports that will be going to council or the proposed reports. They must come in able to make an assessment of whether or not those reports should be allowed to go through or not. That was not done. They were given 3 hours. They did not even have the reports. I mean, every check and balance that we have in council was completely ignored. But programming is a committee of council, and it's there for precisely that reason.
Did you also say that under certain circumstances, that meeting or a meeting like the one where you were ousted can actually be called? Is that correct?
You can call, the speaker can call a meeting. However, we observe a 72-hour notice for ordinary meetings of council. And for extraordinary meetings, our rules are silent on that. However, there are many other factors that we take into consideration. One, she made a pronouncement at the end of the meeting where she was elected as speaker, that the meeting would be held after recess. In other words, after the 10th of October.
Yes, I got that, but I'm saying, what if she has a good enough reason to call an urgent meeting? What are the conditions, what were the conditions she would have had to meet?
So sufficient notice is important. As I've already explained, councillors that go to programming would need to receive the items for programming. Those items would need to be studied by them so that when they come before a programming meeting, they're adequately briefed, they've done their research, if they need to do their research, and they can make informed decision as to the admissibility of those items. That did not happen. This programming meeting was called within 3 hours. People did not even have the item in front of them. She placed an item before them that had been dismissed by a previous programming meeting on grounds of not qualifying to go to council. So our rules are very clear on what motions can be considered by council and what motions cannot be considered by council. You cannot put a motion before council on a matter that's before the courts, a matter that's before our Section 79 committee or our oversight committees. And on those grounds, that motion had actually been kicked out of programming in the previous programming meeting, and she still brought it to this meeting. That was incorrect and still pushed it through by force.
But it doesn't necessarily follow, or does it, that because the agenda was kicked out in a previous meeting, it would automatically be kicked out at the next meeting? It doesn't follow, is it?
The rules will not change from one meeting to the next unless there is a change in the rules, which would only happen through a council process. So the same rules apply, and for the same reasons it was kicked out in the previous programming meeting, it would have been kicked out in this meeting as well, unless it was adapted to meet the requirements of council.
Okay, we'll see what the court says on that one. But at a theoretical level, or were members of your party and your coalition partners, were there members who were absent, who could not attend that meeting because of the time constraints they had? Do you have people who would have voted with you but who couldn't attend the meeting because of the short notice?
Yes, I mean, it's unprecedented that you have a programming meeting called within 3 hours. People live all over the city, people travel. It was just a day or two, I think, before recess, probably a day before recess, I can't remember. So it was really unreasonable for anybody to expect that within 3 hours, people must be in Braamfontein for a programming meeting that they had no prior notice of, no reports had been distributed, completely unprecedented.
And when it comes to the actual voting, were there councillors who could have been at that meeting but who couldn't be because of time constraints?
Yes, I mean, we didn't have a full council. Of course, their block was full. I'm sure they knew that they were going to do this and they were able to plan accordingly. But every other council in council was completely prejudiced. And so there were whole parties that were not even there because they really deemed this meeting invalid, you know, and they couldn't come. In some of the caucuses, you had some people there, some people were simply absent. It was called within less than 24 hours.
Let's go to the politics of this. Your coalition partners who have been on this program over the past few days say that in spite of the procedural and other issues that you are raising, as much as they may be relevant, and we don't know, of course, what the court is going to decide eventually when this matter comes before it. But you, as the DA, had already messed this thing up to a point where there's really no chance of you becoming mayor of the city of Johannesburg again, because they're just fed up with you, given the way you have handled the coalition arrangement. Only yesterday we had Action SA saying it is preparing for a life beyond this coalition, and it is positioning itself as such. The Patriotic Alliance was also here on the show yesterday saying pretty much the same thing.
Unfortunately, I didn't hear them when they were on your show, Rio. Otherwise, I'd be in a better position to comment. But I did look at the Action SA statement that was released today, where they actually thanked me for my leadership of a very difficult coalition. We had 9 political parties. It was not easy. Different ideologies, different expectations, and having to keep it together the whole time was really a mammoth task. And I think I really gave myself to the task. I was completely sold out. I took a lot during that time, but I stood my ground because I saw the bigger vision of rebuilding our city. I've never heard any of our partners complain about my leadership. I've heard complaints about the DA, national leadership. A lot of them also really unfounded, and I've been dealing with some of the misinformation that's been going around today. For instance, claims that I had wanted to concede, to give in the speaker position to the IFP, and that my national leadership refused when I approached them, which was actually incorrect because I never made the call. I was intercepted by an IFP councillor, or the caucus leader of the IFP, who said that his national leadership had actually directed them to withdraw their candidate, and that the DA should therefore go ahead and field their candidate. So there's so many versions of what actually happened, and it's unfortunate that our party leadership is being blamed for things that they should not be blamed for. People are saying DA leadership did not want to deviate from the coalition agreement, and DA leadership was simply saying that there's an agreement for a reason, and that there are provisions for a review of that agreement, and that such a review should happen under normal circumstances and not in a crisis situation. And that's where they were coming from, and that's why they wanted the position to go to the party it was given to in the coalition agreement that was signed by all the coalition partners. So there was nothing malicious about what the Democratic Alliance was doing. Everybody signed the coalition agreement and understood what was in the agreement, and all the Democratic Alliance expected was for everybody to abide by the agreement until such time that it would be reviewed, and my understanding is that time would be soon.
Well, you're right. I mean, they actually had, both Bongani Baloyi and Kenny Kunene had good things to say about you as a person and as a leader in your own right, but they were scathing about your leaders, whom they say were remote controlling you and your colleagues at council. But I want to take a listen to what Bongani Baloyi had to say specifically around what something you also just addressed, that you were prepared to, concede somewhat in the hope that that would accommodate everybody, but you were overruled, he suggested, by your national leadership. But take a listen to what Bongani Baloyi had to say on Friday.
You could tell she understands what's at stake. She's got a heart for the people, given her flaws. But one thing we know about her, she's not a thief. So we are content working with her. She tried. She was failed by Helen Zille and John Steenhuisen. And that is what the residents of Johannesburg must know. And they must also appreciate the level of abuse and arrogance we took to remain in this coalition. And we stuck by it. We stuck by it. Even when this candidate lost, we voted for a DA candidate as in terms of this agreement. And we raised sharp arguments. We were hoping to persuade them. And we accepted that we can't persuade them.
Is he not speaking the truth?
I think I've already addressed it, Vuyo. I did explain that I did not make the call to DA leadership, and therefore it does not follow that they did not agree. And when I never made the call in the first place, I was going to make the call. I was intercepted by the IFP caucus leader, who said his leadership has instructed them to recall their councillor, to withdraw their submission, and that we should therefore go ahead and field a candidate. And therefore, I did not speak to my leadership. I think it's really unfair for DA leadership to have to be accused of something that actually never happened. We must remember here that there's history between Action SA and the Democratic Alliance. In fact, Action SA was born out of the Democratic Alliance, out of the exit of the former Mayor Herman Mashaba. We must also understand that the Patriotic Alliance and the Democratic Alliance are also caught in leadership battles in the Western Cape, in various municipalities. So context is important when we listen to some of these assertions that are made by some of these political parties.
No, true that. A lot of, almost everyone in their leadership comes from the Democratic Alliance. But it's important to, I think, point out as well that, for example, on the issue of the Speaker, even though they differed with you and were against the position you took as the Democratic Alliance, they still voted with you, notwithstanding the doubts, the reservations, the disappointment, and, as Bongani was saying, the frustrations and the humiliation that they suffered.
I suffered probably the most abuse in this coalition. It's just, I don't like to play that kind of politics. Otherwise, there's a lot of things I can come out and say about all kinds of people and how they behaved in this coalition. My interest was always just to focus on the vision and pull everyone together, regardless of their abuse. So, I really don't want to get into that. It won't end well. What I will say, however, is that we all had to go through our own periods of give and take. There are many instances where I had to go and vote in a certain manner in council, not necessarily what I thought was best, but in the interest of the coalition and in the interest of inclusivity and consensus, you would bend. It's not unusual for any political party to do that. So if they voted with us, and it's good. We've done the same in the past as well. There are many concessions that we have given as the Democratic Alliance. A good example is we had a great city manager candidate. And there were all kinds of feelings about the candidate that they might be from the Democratic Alliance, which was untrue, and so on and so forth. But in the interest of progress, we actually conceded that this candidate should rather go to Tshwane because they had been ranked the highest in both municipalities. So there are many instances I can give examples of where the DA actually conceded for the sake of the progress of the coalition, for the sake of unity, and for the sake of building our city.
Let me just fact check something before I ask you my last question, if I may. Just to fact check, as I say something. There were also, you would have seen some of the social media comments and allegations that were made. And among them was that you were deliberately excluded from some of the meetings that your party leaders had, where the situation in the city of Johannesburg was discussed and decisions were taken. Any truth to those allegations?
I've also corrected that. It's completely untrue. There are structures within the coalition at a national level and at a local level. I don't attend national structures except when Johannesburg is being discussed. I was at all times invited to any meeting where the city of Johannesburg was on the agenda. If I missed the meeting, it would have been because there's a clash that I could not get out of, but I would always ensure that I have representation. Often my chief of staff would be there, and Johannesburg would always be represented. My chief of staff would obviously have my mandate. So it's completely untrue to suggest that my political party excludes me from decisions. The only structure of the party that I don't serve on is FedEx. Mayors are not part of FedEx, and some decisions do need to go to FedEx. However, one instance is when we had to decide on a speaker candidate from the Democratic Alliance. There was a FedEx sitting. They didn't know the candidates well enough, and I was invited to go and give some background information so that FedEx would be well informed to be able to make an informed decision. So there would be instances where you can be invited to a FedEx meeting, but I don't ordinarily serve on FedEx, and that's okay. There's a system of checks and balances, and sometimes it's necessary for me to not be part of certain discussions. I am conflicted, I am the mayor, I've got an interest, and sometimes there's a need for objectivity, but it's not one person making decisions. FedEx is a whole structure with many people on it from all provinces across the country. And that's how the our political party operates. Different parties have their own structures. This is not uncommon. It's something that's very common. But anything within the coalition structures, whether it's the coalition oversight group, the technical task team, any meeting where the city of Johannesburg was being discussed, I was invited, and I was either a part of, and if I was not, it would have been because I was held up, but I would have had a representative that had my mandate.
Quick one from a viewer. Lechasa Butler Mollo says, can you please ask former Johannesburg Mayor Dr. Mpho Phalatse if she will join other party because it's alleged that the DA will lose Tshwane and Ekurhuleni because of the alleged arrogant and racist. Yes, you get the gist.
I'm not looking for another political home. I'm actually very happy in the Democratic Alliance, contrary to popular belief. I love the DA. It's a great organization to be a part of. It's one organization where everybody is taken seriously, everyone has agency, everyone has freedom of speech. There's complete freedom to do what you need to do to challenge leadership. It's a wonderful organization to be a part of, and we've got great policies, and we really know how to govern, and we want what's best for our country. I don't see any other political party that aligns with my values, my principles. I don't see any other options for myself in South Africa, so no, I'm not shopping around. Besides, I have no reason to shop around. I'm very happy in the Democratic Alliance.
Dr. Palazzo, let me thank you so much for your time this evening. The former mayor of the city of Johannesburg on her next move, which is to challenge that council meeting that was held on Friday, where she was ousted and the ANC's Dada Morero became the new city of Johannesburg mayor. With me in studio, he was listening to that conversation with the former mayor, is one of the masterminds, if I may call her that, behind the DA's ousting of the city, of the DA in the city of Johannesburg. Tasneem Mutara is the Deputy Provincial Secretary of the ANC in the province of Gauteng. Good evening. Thanks very much for your time.
Good evening. And
so you guys are busy cooking up a storm. You've ousted the DA on Friday, and your next stop, I believe, is Ekurhuleni and Tshwane.
Look, I think for us, we're looking at the status of the coalitions. Are they working? Are they not working? Many of the coalition partners have approached the ANC to say that they've worked with us in previous coalitions. Their experience of working with the DA is not the same experience that they have when they worked with the ANC. And let's begin to explore, have conversations about whether we can enter into coalitions again. Patriotic Alliance would have been one, especially, for instance, in Johannesburg, COPE, IFP. In Ekurhuleni, we held a very stable coalition together in that municipality for a duration of 5 years, a complete term. The coalition in Johannesburg has not lasted a year. It has fallen apart at the seams, and for us, it's about stable governments, working together with partners who respect each other, partners who give each other space and agency to be able to service our communities, and ultimately want a stable government so that we can deliver services to our communities.
Well, the DA, I mean, I had their provincial chairperson, Solim Simanga, yesterday, who says these guys are about positions. They're about, you know, the cookie jar.
Is he talking about us or himself? Because the fight between the DA and their coalition partners was precisely because they couldn't agree on the power sharing that needs to happen in a coalition government. So I would argue that the DA wants to keep it all to themselves, whereas the ANC, when we were in coalition governments, we expressed our views as to how we think the power sharing arrangement should work, agreed to that, and that principle led that coalition government, especially, for instance, like I say, in Ekurhuleni, prime example, a metro municipality, very stable for 5 years. That coalition in Ekurhuleni, as we speak, is also falling apart.
What are the principles on which you have negotiated with your, I mean, Kenny Gunene was here. He was waxing lyrical about, you know, the conversations you as a secretariat, you and TK have had with them. But of course, also at the same time saying, but if they treat us like the DA, we'll deal with them in the same way we treated the DA over the past a couple of weeks. So what are the principles involved outside of the recognition that you are in a coalition? In other words, you haven't won an election, so therefore you must accommodate. Are there other principles?
The principles are accountability, mutual respect, the fact that we all have constituencies that have put us in those seats, and those constituencies need to be serviced. Constant communication and negotiation, as well as interaction on any principal matter item that needs to go to council. As well as just the fact that we need to appreciate that service delivery is a non-negotiable, making sure that the city runs, municipalities run the way they should, stable administration, political accountability, and that nobody should feel as if they are undermined by any party. A big brother approach is not going to work, and they appreciate that from us. We've committed that, look, we've worked in coalitions before. It's not our first rodeo, if I could put it that way. They have experience of working with us. So they would be better placed to say that, look, we've had experience with working with you as the ANC. We've also now experienced a coalition where the DA thinks that they are in charge of us, we are beholden to them, we are not equal partners. And the reality is that there is no political party that can go it alone. We need each other, whether it's 1 seat, 2 seats. There's nobody that can establish municipalities and govern them alone. So those are the principles: mutual respect, constant communication, engagement, and no big brother approach across. Continued accountability, both at an administrative as well as a political level to our society.
Well, moving to do what you have done in the city of Johannesburg, in Ekurhuleni is going to be tougher, even more so in Tshwane when one looks at the numbers. Have you thought of how you're going to approach it?
Well, look, we present ourselves as the African National Congress, what we stand for, what our communities have requested from us to do, what has been in our manifesto, and what we have committed to do. When we present that to political parties who are represented in councils, I can tell you we're not far away from each other. Our communities want the same in terms of basic services. They want the same in terms of good, clean governance. They want the same in terms of just making sure that there is stability, no political heckling between political parties. So we present that as we are, as the African National Congress. We listen to what are the non-negotiables from the various parties. Those things that we are hard and fast on, I think we set them aside. But there are many more aspects that we agree on, and that's why we are able to take the process and the engagements forward.
I was looking at some of the numbers, the number crunching that one of your comrades in Tshwane has been sending around. So a lot actually depends on your ACDPs, and which is probably a lot trickier to navigate. Those are not parties that normally or ordinarily sort of gravitate towards you. You know, they're known for gravitating more towards your DA. I mean, you don't think that's going to be a bit of a uphill battle?
Not at all. I think we work with the ACDP in the legislature. We work with the ACDP in one of our municipalities in Sedibeng, where we are in a coalition with them. So they are a partner. We have not entered into a coalition with them in the city of Tshwane. And of course, every municipality has its own dynamic. So for instance, IFP we would be able to work with IFP in all our municipalities in Gauteng. It may not be the same case in municipalities in KZN because of local dynamics. So is ACDP a partner to the ANC currently? It is. So we do have relationships with the ACDP. We do have relationships that we're going to explore, further one to strengthen, further one to enhance. And it's working in the legislature, it's working in Sedibeng. Why shouldn't it work in the city of Tshwane? We've just not explored that avenue, but I think with the relationships we've built over time, we have now a solid foundation from which to work forward from, and we can enter into those. If at a local level, those local dynamics are still very fragile, the relationships are still very tense, and we're not yet at a stage where we can enter into coalition agreements immediately, it's not that we will stop talking. We're going to continuously engage with all these parties all the time until we get a sense of that we are comfortable, all of us, to be able to work together with each other.
How much of all of this is an attempt by the ANC to consolidate your position ahead of the 2024 election? There is that very real threat that you may just, come below, 50 plus 1, which may mean, well, the end of you, basically, in the province of Gauteng. How much of this has got to do with that?
I think for us, of course, there is no single party that isn't looking towards 2024 and what 2024 means. Coalitions, we are in the era of coalitions. I think we've got to accept that. We've got to do all that we can, and we are going to do all that we can to make sure that we do win decisively. We win the province decisively. For us, consolidation of the power, I think it's more just about having stable governments. For us as a provincial government and the provincial leadership in Gauteng, we need stable municipalities to be able to also assist and support the rollout of our program of action. If we don't have stable municipalities, if we don't have stable governments in municipalities, it renders what we want to do at a provincial level quite difficult to do. So for us, that stability does help us in just expanding the provincial program of action. I don't think there's a single party out there that is not looking towards 2024, even if they're sitting with one seat in the municipality currently. The fact is that every election, everybody starts on a clean slate. You've got to go out, win the hearts and minds of citizens, convince them of what you want to achieve in a short space of time, tell your story about what you have been able to do, prove yourself, and hope that on the day of elections at the ballot box, citizens make the correct decision in your favor.
And of course, we can't see today's events in isolation either. David Makhura resigns, and as your president told our journalists earlier today, your chairperson will now become the premier of the province. Is that a wise thing to do, though?
Look, I think for us, importantly for all of us just to remember is that Premier Makhura did make an indication very early on in this year that he's not standing for any position.
Well, he knows what happens. We all know what happens when people are no longer in power. It's been...
Well, he could have made himself available for a position, but up front, even before nomination started, he indicated that he's not available and requested that branches not nominate him.
But we're not talking about positions. Here's my dilemma.
Yes.
I mean, currently, Panyaza Lesufi is the MEC for Education.
Yes.
Now he's going to have to oversee the entire provincial government, whereas he would have had a little corner to focus on and then be able to run or lead the ANC's campaign in the province of Gauteng without taking too much responsibility. That's what one would have thought.
Hasn't he done well in education?
Would happen. No, but
I think here's
my point. He now needs to have, a bird's eye view of everything that's happening in Gauteng. But he needs to be, I mean, where you've had good presidents before, it's people who have actually made sure that they know what is happening in each and every corner of their sphere of government. Those are the good presidents you've had. Those who didn't bother or didn't care or cared only about little corners where there were lots of advantages and benefits for them, didn't give a damn. So that is really my issue, whether strategically it's actually the best thing to do.
Look,
should you have left David Makhura there? Panyaza Lesufi focuses in his corner, but then gets more time, and energy to focus on your campaign.
Look, I think for us, it was a strategic move on our part. We want the people of Gauteng also to be able to get a sense of what the leadership of a premiership under Panyaza Lesufi will look and feel like in the province. He's done extremely well in education. I don't think there's anybody, possibly except AfriForum, that could say he hasn't done and excelled in the education portfolio. There's even been calls to have him as a Minister of Education so that what he has done in Gauteng, he can do in other provinces. I think what he has done in one portfolio, he can do across provincial government. We have complete confidence in his leadership abilities. Does he know? As members of the executive, we have a bird's eye view of what is happening in the province. Whether you are in your little corner or not, we sit periodically to have a real appreciation and understanding of what is happening in the province. He does have that. He has been in the education portfolio for 8 years now in Gauteng. I think that we want that same exuberance, energy, stamina, foresight, just that leadership style and qualities that he has and has been able to show at the helm of education. We want the entire populace of Gauteng to be able to experience that, get a sense of what 2024 and beyond under the premiership of a person like Panyaza Lesufi will look like.
Well, we'll see if that indeed pays off. But thank you very much for your time, Tasneem Ouattara, who is the Deputy Secretary of the ANC in the province of Gauteng. After the break, is replacing Gauteng's Premier a wise and necessary thing to do ahead of the 2024 national and provincial elections? Our panel for this evening weighs in. Don't go away. Gauteng Education MEC and newly elected ANC provincial chairperson Panyaza Lesufi will on Thursday replace David Makhura at the helm of South Africa's richest and most populous province. This after David Makhura today tendered his resignation. Well, earlier on, our political reporter Samkele Maseko caught up with the ANC president on the sidelines of a SADTU meeting. Take a listen to what the president made of today's events.
There's no drama. It has all been well executed, and we wish the new premier well.
Well, no drama indeed, but will the changing of guard give the ANC the majority it desperately needs to hold on to power in the richest and most populous province? Well, my panelists for this discussion are political analyst Asanda Ngwasheng and governance specialist Sandile Swana. Good evening to both of you, and thank you so much for your time. Mr. Swana, what do you make of these developments? Look, it was a long time coming. I mean, people have been talking about this for a while, but does it make it the right thing to do necessarily, given the challenges facing the ANC in this province as it marches towards 2024?
This obviously was not totally unexpected. But to my mind, it remains worrying in the sense that elected office bearers are struggling to finish their term, starting with the recall of Thabo Mbeki, followed with the recall of Zuma, and any uncertainties around Cyril Ramaphosa, and in the present era, the recall of, in some way or the other, of Zigalala and now Makura. But if you look at all the cases I've mentioned, except of course the most recent ones, every time there's been these recalls, we have struggled to have positive, measurable progress. Zuma improved nothing on Mbeki, and Ramaphosa improved nothing on Zuma. In fact, things got worse after each recall. So this reminds me of the issues that concerned us in the early 90s, late 80s, when negotiations were starting to be on the table, that whether, like other African countries, we will be run on the basis of coup d'etat or untimely changes of government.
Asana Ngwasheng, good or bad move, notwithstanding what ANC President Cyril Ramaphosa had to say earlier, that there's no drama. We all knew that this was going to happen. It had been announced already.
Well, of course, it's going to say that, there's no drama, because that's what the ANC does. As soon as the next bench of leaders is ready for leadership, they don't even give the current leadership the time to transition, and they are ready to, have their time to basically do what they do, which is corruption. And so we are not surprised that, David Makura has had to resign following the fact that the current education MEC has won Gauteng. He's now basically lining himself up and lining his own people for their tenders and for, whatever benefits they're looking to get from being the leader of Gauteng. Unfortunately, in this case, though, I do want to mention that I think David Makura was one of the most lackluster premiers that Gauteng has ever had. And so it's actually sad to even try to defend him, because his track record is not the best. Since 2014, he's actually done very little that we can write home about. And to the contrary, Panyaza Lesufi has done well in terms of the education portfolio, but I do worry about whether he'll be able to have the same success as a premier that he was able to have with the education portfolio. Because when you're focusing on one portfolio, it's fairly easy to show success, but when you have to focus on an entire province, and especially one that's been teetering on the brink of being removed from the ANC, it's a much, much more difficult position to be in. And it's going to be interesting to see how he fares. I don't know if it's a very good idea to, literally only with a year left to 2024 and potentially being elected into the Gauteng Premiership, if the ANC wins it, to now try and show your ability to lead or not, because it could literally blow up in his face such that the ANC loses Gauteng, because this coming year is going to be the most critical for the ANC than any other year that they've had, including, I would say, 1994.
In fact, Sandile, precisely, the latter part, especially of, Asanda's contribution, is what made me ask Tasneem just now as to whether it would not have been wise to actually keep David Makura in the position of Premier so that Panyaza Lesufi can then focus perhaps narrowly on education, while at the same time being the face, the voice, of the ANC's campaign in Gauteng. That would free him up, to focus on the election campaign.
Yes, that's exactly where I started. I just didn't see, I have never seen, in fact, from when they started this whole practice of terminating people before time. I think it's an unfortunate and unwise decision. And I agree with you that Lesufi should have focused on building the ANC. The ANC in all the metros in Gauteng is terribly weak. I think it would be fair for me to say it is a 33% party right now in Gauteng. So coming out of that, nevertheless, we need to be so cautious because there is a danger where Lusufi is concerned for his activities. He had many loud activities in Gauteng, but I am not sure whether there's the key things that need to be measured is what he excelled in. I actually pulled up a record of top performing schools in South Africa, and Gauteng, the best performing school was War School, Waterkloof. Now, the biggest problem in South African education is not the white schools or the old white schools. It is that the township schools, the black schools, the schools in the rural areas, the actual villages have stayed behind. Black children are not competitive in the world. The children that are competitive in the world are actually white children. And I have no evidence that the Sufi has actually solved that problem in Gauteng. So these credentials that he is being given are for energy and noise, not actual performance anyway.
It's very interesting. Asanda, one wonders because, I mean, I don't know if you were able to listen in as I was speaking to the ANC's provincial secretary, deputy provincial secretary just now, and earlier to the former mayor of the city of Johannesburg, because part of the ANC's plan is to go back to recapture the metros in Gauteng. It did that on Friday with the city of Johannesburg. Up next, I'm made to believe, is Ekurhuleni and as well as Tshwane. Now, it's a strategy that will probably work, but only if the ANC does well in the next, well, less than 2 years, basically, that it is going to have, but one that will backfire very badly if they make terrible mistakes in the intervening period.
I mean, I don't think personally that it's a very good strategy what they're trying to do of taking back the metros, because there's a sense in which they are disregarding the opinions and the desires of the voters. The voters did not vote for the ANC for a very specific reason. And so to now use these backdoor routes that in some ways coalition governments give them to get back into power when the electorate has given you, or rather remove the mandate from you, is actually the opposite of what they should be doing. What they should be doing is focusing on Gauteng province, which they still do have, and improving the province rather than trying to take control where the control has been removed from them by the people. This is literally one of those cases where, you know, in political science, we talk about the social contract being broken. And the ANC has a long track record, unfortunately, of consistently trying to break the social contract, which is the very thing that makes governance and particularly democracy works. People only are governable if they give you the mandate to govern them. If you take the mandate without actually being given, that is when you're going to have problems. And right now we're looking at a Gauteng that has, you know, a new premier, there's a new mayor, there's a new speaker. There's just too much by way of destabilization that's happening in the middle of, you know, load shedding, which the Johannesburg water has us believing is causing them to be unable to provide water, which is a vital resource that actually is more dangerous to not have than electricity, which we can actually live without. And so this is not the time to be, you know, trying to show a strong face by recapturing metros that have been lost. This is the time to be showing your strength where you have the mandate.
Well, part of the ANC's retort, I mean, Asanda, has been that, look, yes, the voters may not have given us the, you know, majority in these municipalities, but in pure numbers terms, the ANC continues to have the highest numbers, but just not enough to govern on its own. So you can't read that as a total rejection of the party.
I read it as, I do read it as a rejection of the party. I see it that the people have given the ANC the mandate to be the strongest opposition. They still want the ANC voice, but by not giving the majority, they do not want the ANC to be in power. And I think it's just kind of yet another reminder of how deaf the ANC is, that they would choose to read not getting 90% as still a vote of confidence. I mean, if you listen to, your previous, the representative of the ANC, she says, the most fascinating thing, which I thought, I took pause when she said it. She said, for every political party, an election is a blank slate. That is a blatant lie for a political party that has been in power for almost 30 years. It should never consider itself to ever have a blank slate when they've had so many years to mess up, and they have consistently messed up. And so the idea that you have a political party that has been in power for 30 years that will, state publicly that they see each election as an opportunity for a fresh start, it just shows you the level of denialism. It shows you the level of being out of touch and the kind of emptiness of the ANC when it comes to understanding where South Africa is and what it is that South Africans want, and how it is that they can hope to recapture the kind of popularity that they at some stage have had.
Your final thoughts, Sandile, on whether, this package of proposals, or not proposals such, but these actions of reclaiming the metros, using, of course, these coalition partners, and removing David Makura, putting Panyaza Lesufi in his place. Do you think this is what will do the trick?
This is a dangerous move for a lot of people. For instance, if I was running a political party, I would ask many questions whether I want to partner with a party that has a 30-year track record of mediocrity and failure. When you read the report that was written by Barbara Creasy on the economic side of the Gauteng province, and I read and I compared Makura and Pakstau's track record on the economy of Gauteng, it was catastrophic. And this is a report written by Barbara Creasy of the African National Congress. So their record is dismal. Now, when you have a partner like Gauteng Mackenzie, partners like the EFF going, these are fly-by-night type of guys who will fly with anything and abandon anything at the slightest sight of trouble. And I do not see this ANC that says it's going to end load shedding in Johannesburg and all sorts of things doing anything. And to Asanda's point, what are the reasons why this ANC was kicked out of power? The ANC has been kicked out of power. They are not needed and they are not wanted. Now, corruption is one of them. Incompetence is another one. And consistent poor performance another. We are not hearing them saying, in the remaining period before the next voting date, what are they going to do to remedy those three things? And the problems with cadre deployment, the deployment of criminals, opportunists, and careerists. So those, to me, are the things that are there. And I think Gauteng Mackenzie and the EFF in particular can still run at any time. So this thing is extortionate, it is blackmail, it is opportunism in itself.
Sandile Swana, Sandang Washeng, let me thank both of you for your time and for your insights this evening. And that's our show for tonight. So join us again tomorrow evening, same time. Have a good night.